Hey guys, tonight we step into the skin of a young woman in the Middle Ages, just 19, and your life is about to be rewritten by hands that aren't yours. You're standing in the cold courtyard of your father's manor, heart pounding beneath layers of borrowed silk. Around you, voices drift like smoke, bartering, murmuring, assessing. The deal is nearly done. Your husband-to-be approaches. You've met him twice, once at a banquet, where he ignored your presence entirely, too busy arguing over land taxes, and once in private, when he inspected your teeth like a horse. He's at least 45. His last wife died giving birth to a son that didn't survive. His steward, standing 2 steps behind, once remarked that your frame looks sturdy. No one needs to explain what comes next. You already know. Women surround you, braiding ribbons into your hair, adjusting the veil that keeps slipping from your brow. Their hands are practiced. Their faces are blank. Your mother doesn't meet your gaze. Maybe she remembers her own wedding day. Or maybe she's avoiding the weight of your question. Is this all there is? They say you should feel lucky. That this is a strong match. He owns fertile land. He's not known for cruelty. You'll have warm blankets, a personal maid, maybe even a silver comb. Others aren't so fortunate. Some women are married off at 16 to men with grey beards and grown sons. Some are sent to cloisters. Some disappear with no vows spoken at all. The chapel bell rings. It's time. You step forward, not with hope, but with duty. The guests turn to face you. The priest adjusts his robes. The steward holds a scroll. This isn't a moment of love. It's an arrangement woven in silence and Latin. And you are the dowry walking. The priest begins. His voice floats somewhere above your head. You don't catch every word, but you recognize the one that seals your fate. Consent here. Consent. The church requires only a whisper of it, a nod, a word. You give one. That single gesture, almost invisible, binds you for life. You'll learn later that even this performance wasn't necessary. In many places, 2 people claiming each other before witnesses is enough. And those vague rules are used most often against women. A field, a whisper, 2 men who nod, and suddenly you're someone's wife. At the feast, laughter rings out. Bread is torn. Wine flows freely. The musicians play something meant to sound cheerful. You sit beside your new husband. He boasts of planting sons before the next harvest. You say nothing. The ring on your finger presses tight. Less like a promise, more like a shackle. 3 bolts of wool, 2 oxen, and a springtime parcel of land. That was the price. No one asked what you thought. No one asked if your hands were shaking. A minstrel sings of true love in the far corner. You can't help but laugh, just once, dry and quiet. When the guests are gone and the torches gutter low, you are led to a small chamber. The door shuts with a sound heavier than wood. They say a marriage isn't real until it's consummated. A word you've heard but never truly understood. Not until now. The bed is carved and cold. The sheets are rough. Dried herbs hang from the rafters, said to ward off spirits, though they do nothing for the chill in your chest. You sit on the edge. He stands by the fire, pouring another cup of wine. Outside, the servants wait in silence, some for tradition, some for curiosity, all of them ready to collect the evidence of a union that wasn't yours to choose. You already know what they're waiting for, the proof, the stain, the so-called mark of honour, as though your body were parchment and pain, a signature. No one says it outright, but it lingers in the air like smoke. Your husband expects it, yes, but so do the servants, the steward, the priest. Even the cook will know by morning. This strange obsession with blood, as if virtue is only real when it's painful, as if trust can only be earned through a wound, as if a woman's worth must tear to be seen. You've heard the whispers. What happens if the sheet comes back clean? Some men demand annulment, others grow angry, lash out. A few women, they say, slip a hidden vial of goose's blood under the mattress, just in case. A bird sacrifice in exchange for silence. You wonder how many before you have reached for that kind of trick. How many shook in the dark, not from fear of pain, but fear of not bleeding enough for strangers to believe their dignity was intact. The door creaks again. A maid enters, silent and focused. She sets down a candle, a bowl of water, and beside the bed, a carefully folded cloth. She doesn't meet your eyes. She doesn't need to. You both know what it's for. Your husband speaks little. He doesn't ask if you're afraid or if you're ready. His hands are rough, his breath tinged with wine. When he lies beside you, the mattress sags toward him. For a fleeting moment you think about standing up, saying no, leaving. But the moment passes. This is what was promised. What noble daughters are taught to expect. Quiet obedience, stillness mistaken for acceptance. When it ends, he turns away, already drifting into sleep. You lie flat, eyes open, watching the flicker of the candle fade across the wooden beams. There is pain, yes, but sharper still is the feeling of being looked through, like something borrowed, not someone known. Hours pass before the door creaks once more. 2 women enter, older, practiced. They move without a word. One lifts the sheet, examines it, folds it with careful fingers. Their faces remain unchanged. No judgment, no joy, only duty. Then they're gone. You're left alone. No one asks how you feel the next morning. No one mentions the cloth. At breakfast, your husband tears into bread with loud satisfaction. The steward talks about rainfall and barley. The world continues, utterly, unchanged, except for you. Outside, fog clings to the thatch and the fields. Inside, something has shifted. Not broken, not yet, but hollowed, sealed over. By mid-afternoon, you ride to your new home. His manor is older than your father's, more stone than wood, damp at the edges. A few servants nod as you pass. One woman, her apron worn and her hands red with work, watches you too long. Her expression is unreadable. She doesn't speak, just turns away and walks inside. You follow. That night he sleeps easily. You don't. The chamber is silent, save for the distant creak of the beams and the wind tapping at the shutters. There is no lock on the door, no key in your pocket, only silence. You think again about the vow, consentia, to consent, a beautiful word, a cruel disguise. It's only your first day as a wife, and already the lesson is clear. Love was never the point. Control is, and you're not a bride. You're property, passed from one house to another like a mare deemed fit for breeding. You wonder if it will always feel like this. You tell yourself it might get better. It won't. But no one will say that aloud. Not here, not in this world. You don't even get to unpack your own things. They arrive in a wooden chest 2 days later, carried by a servant who smells like sheep and doesn't speak unless spoken to. The chest contains a few linen shifts, a woolen cloak that's already too thin for the northern wind, and a comb carved from bone. There's also the bridal goblet, a wedding gift meant to symbolize unity. You run your fingers along the silver rim and wonder if he gave the same one to his first wife. You've barely learned the layout of the manor and already you're being summoned. His mother, her name is Lady Alice, though no one calls her that, has requested your presence in the weaving room. She says it in the tone of a priest announcing confession. Not a request, an obligation. The weaving room is small and dim, the walls draped with half-finished tapestries. She sits in the centre like a spider in her web, hands folded, not touching the loom but watching it. A younger woman spins thread nearby. Neither of them look up when you enter. "Sit," she says without greeting. You obey. For the next hour she explains the rules, not with warmth or guidance, but with the same tone she might use to train a dog. These servants do not answer to you yet. You will earn their respect by rising early and tending to your duties. You must oversee the stores, the household accounts, and ensure no salt goes missing from the kitchen. You will not speak over your husband at meals. You will visit the village only on assigned days. You will keep your eyes lowered in church. You will, in short, behave as a wife of this house should. Your name means nothing here, she says finally, her voice as hard as the loom shuttle. Only your obedience does. You nod. What else can you do? At dinner, your husband grunts approval at the soup and makes no mention of your new role. It's not that he's unkind, at least not in the ways that count, but there's something deeply chilling in his indifference. As if he's already forgotten you're new here, as if you've simply replaced a piece of furniture that had gone missing. That night he sleeps soundly again. You lie awake, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling. In the days that follow, your duties pile up. You rise before the sun to inventory the pantry. You count eggs, check salt barrels, approve purchases. You're barely 17 and expected to manage an entire estate's domestic economy. No one trained you for this. Once, you ask the steward a question about the ledgers. He raises an eyebrow and mutters something about asking your betters. You learn not to ask again. You're not alone, technically. There are 2 other married women in the house, both older, both cold. They don't speak unless necessary. One of them, Emmelot, used to be a merchant's daughter, married off when her father's fortunes collapsed. She walks with a limp. You don't ask how she got it. At night, you begin to hear things. Whispers, behind doors, a laugh that cuts off too quickly. Once you hear a servant say your name and then stop sharply as if bitten. And always there's the gaze of Lady Alis, watching you from the stairwell, the courtyard, the chapel pew. She never speaks again, not directly, but her presence is like fog, silent, seeping, and impossible to escape. You realize slowly that this marriage is not just to your husband, it's to the entire household, and they all expect something from you. They expect you to fit in, to keep quiet, to produce, to be worth the dowry you came with. Weeks pass before you're taken into the village. It's a test more than an outing. Lady Alis doesn't accompany you, but a handmaid does, trailing a half step behind, quiet as a shadow. You ride side saddle, wrapped in a cloak too fine for mud roads, and you feel the eyes before you see the faces. People stop what they're doing. Bakers pause mid-loaf. A blacksmith lifts his hammer but does not strike. Children gawk. Women glance sideways and nudge each other. No one greets you outright, but you sense the unspoken welcome. Curious, cold, reserved. They've been watching for you. The new wife. The second wife. The girl from the lowlands with nothing but a dowry and a frightened gaze. You're brought to the market stall where bread, fish and cloth are sold. It's your duty to inspect goods, to make yourself known. You repeat polite phrases you barely remember, your cheeks burning under their scrutiny. One woman, older and round-shouldered, offers you a limp turnip. Your husband likes these, she says, with something too close to a smirk. You nod and take it. On the way back, your maid finally speaks. They're wondering if you'll last longer than the last one. You freeze. She doesn't explain. Back at the manor, you wander the hall where her portrait still hangs. Her name was Isabel. No one talks about her. But her presence lingers in odd ways. A ribbon forgotten in a drawer, a prayer book in the chapel with the corner still turned down, and once, a single embroidered handkerchief tucked into the side of your shared chest. The stitchwork is clumsy but sweet. You imagine she was young too. The steward mentions her only once. She tried to manage the household differently, he mutters. Didn't go well. Your husband never says her name, but once during supper he calls you Isabel by mistake. You say nothing. At night you dream of her. You imagine she sat on the same stool, stirred the same pot, endured the same silences. Maybe she also stared at the rafters in the dark, counting how many nights she'd survived. Your husband doesn't mistreat you, at least not in the ways you feared. But there is a weariness in his touch, like he's fulfilling a chore. Sometimes he doesn't come to bed at all. You hear his boots in the corridor, the creak of another door opening, and then silence. You say nothing. Once, you find a tiny bronze comb beneath the rushes near his dressing table. Not yours, not new. You place it on the table and leave the room. The next morning it's gone. You begin to understand that in this world, marriage is not about romance, nor even companionship. It's about survival, political, financial, social. Your presence here stabilizes something for someone. Land, lineage, legacy. You're a hinge in a larger door, and yet you're expected to smile when spoken to laugh softly, to dress in his colours during feast days, to keep the peace in the kitchen, to walk beside him during Mass, to bless him before battle, to ask nothing, suspect nothing, and want for nothing. Once you accidentally mention that your sister used to sing during supper. He looks at you strangely. That's not fitting, he says, and the topic dies like a smothered flame. You think of your sister often. You wonder if she married yet. You wonder if she still sings, or if, like you, the music was taken out of her. The wedding feast had been loud and overflowing. Roast capon dripping with fat, trenchers soaked with wine, some travelling minstrel shouting rhymes over the clank of pewter mugs. But now the noise is gone, and in its place is a silence that seeps into your bones. The room is cold stone, no fire lit. A single candle burns low on a table, its wax dripping in slow rivulets. And there he is again, your husband, sitting at the edge of the bed, removing his boots with the same indifference a butcher gives his apron. It's not the act that unnerves you. It's the ceremony around it, the ritual hush, the wait. You've learned that for noble families the wedding night isn't just private, it's public property, a shared spectacle. The next morning the servants will speak of you. The steward will look you in the eye for the first time. The household will quietly shift around the new mistress, if you are judged to have performed correctly. He stands, backlit by the flickering candle. His silhouette is wide, unmoving. You pull the covers over your chest though you're still dressed. It's not modesty, it's protection, or the illusion of it. Then he speaks. You know what comes next, he says, not unkindly, as though reading lines from a play he's performed before. You nod. You've nodded so many times these past weeks, your neck aches from compliance. You wonder what he expects. Passion, innocence, silence. What he gets is someone holding her breath. He reaches for you. The linen nightgown twists under his hand, the fabric pulling tight at your waist. He smells of ale and something metallic, maybe old blood or rust. His touch isn't cruel, it's just efficient, a duty, a tradition passed down like an heirloom sword, handled but never questioned. And then it's done. No words, no tenderness, just the wet sound of movement and the slow ticking of your mind trying to float away. Later he rolls over and snores. You lie there blinking at the ceiling, waiting for the ache to settle. It doesn't. It's not just your body that hurts. It's the knowledge that this will happen again. Night after night, feast or famine. Whether you're tired or sick or simply hollow inside, you'll be expected to perform this rite again and again until it produces something. an heir, a child, proof. The door opens. The maid enters. She doesn't speak. She carries a linen sheet and a shallow copper basin. You shift away, your body stiff as carved wood. The maid inspects the bedding. She doesn't flinch, just folds the sheet and leaves. Later, you overhear her speaking with another servant in the corridor. A whisper and a chuckle, then footsteps. You don't want to know what they said, but you do hear one phrase. She bled enough to keep her place. There it is again, blood as currency, blood as truth, blood as proof that you belong here. And what if you hadn't? You've heard the stories. One girl, not far from here, was returned to her father after the wedding night with no dowry refunded, declared barren before she ever had a chance. Another, her husband dragged her through the street, lifting her chemise to show the villagers what failure looks like. She lived, for a while. You pull the blanket tighter around you and stare at the stone wall. Tomorrow they'll smile politely, offer you warm bread and cool milk, but tonight your world is a candle guttering beside a damp bed and a man who doesn't even know your middle name. The mornings after are always the strangest. There's a plate left outside your door, cheese, barley bread, and once a fig. A quiet offering, as if the household is congratulating you for surviving the night without saying a word. No one knocks, no one asks, but the entire manor knows. You can feel it in the way the scullery girls avoid your eyes and how the steward greets you with a stiffer nod than before. At first, you wonder if it's all in your head. But then, a few days later, a servant named Hilda drops a bundle of linens and says, "You'll want to save the sheets from last week, the ones with the blood, just in case." Then she adds, almost kindly, "Some ladies keep them their whole lives, to remind their husband, or the village." You blink at her. She shrugs and walks away. You do save them, not because you want to, but because the threat beneath her voice lingers, just in case. This idea that your pain must be archived, preserved like a relic in a shrine. It crawls into you. You fold the sheet and place it under the cedar chest behind your wedding comb. You hope you'll never need it. But even hoping feels like tempting fate. Soon enough, the pressure begins. Has the bleeding stopped? The midwife asks in a flat voice. She doesn't care about your comfort. She's watching the calendar. We'll need to count the moons. You're expected to conceive. You say nothing. Another week passes, then two. At dinner, your husband mentions fertility herbs in passing. You realise he's speaking about you, to the steward of all people, as if discussing a field he expects to sow. You drink the bitter teas the midwife prepares. They taste like boiled dandelions and copper. One of them makes you dizzy. Another sends you retching into a basin. When you ask what's in it, she just says, "Roots. They work for some." Every time you rise too slowly, someone raises an eyebrow. When you avoid wine at supper, Lady Alis stares for a moment too long. The entire household begins watching you, not with care, but with expectation, and your body becomes something separate from yourself, a vessel, a prophecy, a timepiece waiting to strike. It's strange how quickly you stop being a person. You become a function, a hope, a chance for lineage. The pressure is constant but polite, like the smile of a blade just before it cuts. You start counting days by the fire's warmth. If the ashes are cold, it's morning. If the logs crackle, it's evening. And if the hearth stays unlit, that means your husband has not come to your room. Not that it changes much. You could say no, in theory. Church law says a wife has rights. But the church also says marriage is a sacrament and conjugal debt is holy. Refusing your husband too often can be grounds for punishment. Not physical, officially, but social, spiritual, familial. You once heard of a girl who said no too many times. Her husband locked her in the dovecote until she changed her mind. By the time she was let out, she couldn't stand in sunlight without shielding her eyes. You ask if it's true. A servant replies, "Which part?" And that's when you realise there are no warnings in this world, only precedents. Each bed has a history, each sheet tells a story, and now so do you. You're told that a woman can marry without saying a word. All it takes is a nod, or a silence mistaken for agreement. The church says consent is required, but not joy, not understanding, not even clarity. So long as you're of age and there's no loud protest, the union stands. And if anyone doubts it, witnesses can be gathered, stories can be stitched. What's spoken once in a field might be upheld in court, even if you barely remember saying it. You learn this not from books, they're kept locked in the manor study, but from the kitchen. Old Gertrude, the baker's sister, tells you between shaping loaves. A girl in my cousin's village married by accident, she says. She was 12. Played bride with a shepherd boy for fun. A year later, his father demanded the dowry. He tried to laugh, but Gertrude just nods slowly. The bishop upheld it, said their words were binding. They lived together until she died, in childbirth. There it is again, that word. It hangs over every wife's head like a curtain about to fall. Childbirth. You never imagined it would be part of the punishment, that giving life could be the thing that ends yours. But here, it's the most common story of all, and sometimes it's not just marriage that traps you. Sometimes it's taken from you without ceremony. In the lower village there's a girl named Lynette. You met her once when she brought baskets of leeks to the manor. She had bright eyes and fast hands. A few months later she disappeared. The rumour was swift. The lord's cousin visited for 1 week. Linné was summoned to serve his table, and then she was gone. You ask Hilda, the quiet maid, what happened. She just says, "Some marriages don't start with a wedding." Then she looks away. You try to piece together what that means, but deep down, you already know. Later, a priest visits for Lent. His sermon is long and heavy, filled with warnings about Eve and the virtue of silence. Afterward he blesses the manor, he blesses the table, he blesses your husband's sword. No one blesses you. That evening you sit in the garden. The ground is still hard from winter, the trees are bare, but you see something poking through the dirt, a little wooden doll, faded and half-rotted, likely a child's toy, forgotten and buried long ago. You wonder if she lived long enough to marry. You wonder how many girls said yes without understanding what they were agreeing to. You wonder how many never said anything at all. Then you remember your own vow, the way your voice caught in your throat, the way you nodded because everyone expected you to. The whole courtyard watched that nod. It was enough. That's the part that keeps you up at night. Not the pain, not the fear, but the realization that silence can be mistaken for consent. And once given, it can never be taken back. Once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. Women who fall silent the moment a man enters the room. Young wives, whose laughter fades overnight, replaced by careful words and stiff shoulders. Brides who vanish for weeks, then return with new jewellery and a gaze that never quite meets yours. You begin to understand. Marriage doesn't always come with music or celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through an order, not an invitation, a father's nod, a steward's decision, a lord's favour wrapped in formality and finality. Rarely does anyone ask the woman at the centre of it all what she wants. One evening, Lady Ailys tells you a story by the hearth. Her tone is gentle, but her words are meant to warn. She speaks of a cousin who once tried to resist a match. The girl locked herself in the granary for 3 days, refused food, refused to dress, refused to open the door. They waited. They said nothing. And when she emerged, Pale, trembling, defeated, the wedding went forward as if nothing had happened. "The law," Lady Alis says, eyes fixed on the fire, "has time. It waits for obedience." That's when it becomes clear. Defiance isn't punished immediately, it's simply ignored. Resistance is tolerated because it changes nothing. The church speaks of marriage as sacred, indissoluble, forever. And though separation exists in theory, remarriage is a different matter. Even cruelty rarely qualifies. A husband must do more than wound you. He must shame the church itself, and bruises after all fade. Fear leaves no evidence. Silence leaves no trace. You've heard of women who fled to convents hoping for peace. Some were dragged back before they'd even taken their vows. The church may house souls, but the law reclaims bodies. A wife, after all, is a promise delivered, and promises are not meant to be broken. One afternoon, you pass through the village and see Lynette, a woman you hadn't seen in months. She's standing near the mill, head covered, belly rounding. No ring glints on her hand, no wedding was announced, no feast remembered, just a life rearranged without witness. She doesn't look up. You want to ask, are you safe? Did you choose this? Do you need help? But the words never leave your mouth, because you already know. Even if she answered, what would change? That evening your husband speaks over dinner of a neighbouring noble whose daughter resisted too long. She was married off within days. "Best done early," he says casually, carving meat, "before they get ideas." You nod slowly, as if the flavour of the food needs more time. Your thoughts drift back to your own wedding, the heavy veil, your mother's shaking hands, your father clearing his throat, eyes fixed on the floorboards. They told themselves they were giving you a future, protecting you, securing a safe life. Perhaps they believed it, or perhaps belief is simply another kind of silence. That night, lying beside a man who still feels like a stranger, you learn something deeper than before. This world does not run on mutual vows. It runs on quiet surrender, on systems built so that obedience appears easier than refusal. And once you understand that, the questions change. You no longer wonder what might have happened if you'd said no. You only wonder, how long can someone live like this before they disappear entirely? You wake before dawn now, not because anyone tells you to, but because sleep has learned to avoid you. The manor is quiet at this hour. No clatter of pots, no muttered prayers, no boots on stone. Just the low creak of wood settling and the distant cough of someone who never quite healed from winter. You lie still for a moment, listening, measuring how much of the day you can claim before it claims you. When you rise, you dress silently. The gown you wear belonged to Isabel once. Lady Alis said it plainly, as if announcing the weather. "Waste not," she said. You noticed the stitching had been let out slightly at the waist. You wonder if someone will let it out again for you one day. By the time the servants appear, you're already moving through the household, checking stores, peering into barrels, marking tallies in your head because you're not trusted with the ledger yet. That, Lady Alis says, will come when you prove yourself steady. Steady means quiet, efficient, invisible. You take your meals with your husband, but the conversation rarely includes you. He speaks to the steward about crops, rents, rumours of war. You listen. You learn quickly which opinions are safe and which will earn you a glance that says enough. You speak only when asked, even then carefully. At night you share a bed with a man you're still learning to read. His moods arrive without warning. Some evenings he barely acknowledges you. Others he expects closeness, duty, warmth you've not learned how to manufacture. You comply, always. You've learned that refusal creates questions, and questions create consequences. This is what it means to live with a stranger. You know the shape of his shoulders, but not his fears. You know how he likes his bread cut, but not what wakes him in the night. Once, half asleep, he mutters a woman's name that is not yours. You lie still and pretend not to hear. During the day you are watched, not openly but constantly. Servants report back. Lady Alis notices when you sit instead of stand, when you pause too long at the window, when you leave food untouched. Your body, your habits, your expressions, all of them are read for signs. Of what you're not sure. Disobedience, weakness, failure. Once you laugh. It slips out of you unexpectedly. Something a maid says, something small and human. The room falls silent. Lady Alis looks up slowly, her eyes sharp. "That's not fitting," she says. You nod. The laugh dies immediately, like a candle pinched out between fingers. You begin to understand that marriage here is not companionship. It's surveillance. A performance with no audience applause, only judgment. You're expected to mould yourself to the household's shape, not the other way around. You think of your sister again. You wonder if she too has learned how loud she's allowed to be, and you realise with a quiet heaviness that the man sleeping beside you each night may never truly know you. Because knowing you was never part of the arrangement, some days you almost forget how recent this life is. You move through it with the smoothness of someone who has always belonged here, head slightly bowed, fingers busy with cloth or ledger or spoon. You answer when spoken to. You eat what is served. You smile, but not too broadly. You're becoming a shape that fits. But when the ache starts, low and cramping, you remember. It's your first sign. Your monthlies have not come. At first, you wait. Then you wait a little longer. And then you stop waiting altogether. Because deep down, you already know. It is a strange thing to carry a future inside you when you've only just begun living your own. No one congratulates you yet. You haven't told anyone. But your body's already changing. Softening in places, heavy in others, like clay left too long in the sun. And though you've said nothing, Lady Alis eyes you with the precision of a falcon. She knows. You begin to eat more, slowly, quietly, as if not to draw attention to your own hunger. Your husband notices too, though he never says it outright. One evening after supper, he places a hand on your back. Not possessively, not cruelly, just firmly. "Good," he says. Nothing more. And yet the air between you feels full of something that's no longer yours. That night the sheets are smoother. The fire is already lit. A bowl of warm milk is waiting by the bed. None of this is said to be because of the child, but it is. You feel it in the space they make for you, now that you are carrying a possible heir. Possible. Always that word. Because nothing is promised. You've seen what happens when the possible becomes impossible. Last winter, a girl named Agnes, barely 15, gave birth behind the stables. The child never cried. The midwife blamed the cold. The steward blamed her age. The priest blamed the girl. She didn't eat for 3 days after. You don't want to think about that, but you do, often. In the chapel, you begin lighting candles, not out of piety, but out of fear. You light one for yourself, one for the child, one for Isabel, who must have lit a candle once too. You find yourself whispering to her in the stillness. Did you feel this alone? There's no answer. In your quieter moments, you wonder what kind of mother you will be. You know already that you must survive, for the child, for yourself. But some darker part of you asks the harder question. Will survival mean becoming like Lady Alis? Hardened, silent, unbending. You see it now. How she watches you, not to control you, but perhaps to prepare you, because she knows this is only the beginning. One morning you catch your reflection in a copper basin. Your face looks older, not tired, weathered. like stone worn down by centuries of footsteps. You trace the curve of your belly, barely visible, but already rewriting everything. This child will change your standing, your safety, your usefulness. But will it bring you peace? You can't answer that. You can only keep walking the path laid for you, one careful step at a time. People speak of the lady of the manor as if it's a crown, as if ruling the household is something regal, something desirable, something clean. But when you finally receive the keys, yes, actual iron keys on a ring heavy enough to bruise, they don't come with power. They come with responsibility and surveillance and a kind of silent servitude no one outside the walls ever sees. You're now in charge of salt, flour, lamp oil, linens, wages, mead, needles, soap, and silence. Every missing spoon is your failure. Every cracked jug your disgrace. If the firewood runs short, it's your blame. If the hens stop laying somehow, that's on you too. The kitchen becomes your second bedchamber, the storeroom your second chapel. You walk through rows of barrels and sacks with a slate in your hand and a dozen eyes on your back. You must remember everything. A good lady, you're told, should know whether the wheat will last the winter just by weighing a fistful in her palm. A good lady should notice when the maid's hands shake while kneading dough. A good lady should anticipate illness, fire, theft, and famine, and prevent them all. You try, you really do, but it's never enough. One morning, the cook burns the porridge. Your husband says nothing, but you notice the way he sets down his spoon with just enough force to chip the bowl. Later, the steward informs you the beeswax candles are running low. Then someone reports the chickens aren't being properly fed. Then you find that someone's taken a bar of soap from the guest chamber. You've had the keys for 3 weeks, and already the house is murmuring. Lady Alis doesn't scold you. She doesn't have to. She walks with you into the storeroom, touches the empty spot where the salt should be, and simply says, "Your household reflects your mind." Then she leaves. You stare at that space for a long time. That night, you don't sleep. You walk the halls with a lantern, checking windows, sniffing for dampness, counting the loaves left to rise. A rat darts across the floor and you nearly scream. In the morning, you nod off at prayers and drop the rosary. No one says a word, but the silence that follows is thick and sharp-edged. This is what no one tells you. The lady of the manor is not a queen. She is a steward with no steward, a manager with no praise, a caretaker whose care is never reciprocated. Once, a girl from the village sees you pass and curtsies so low she nearly loses her balance. She whispers, "Must be lovely, having servants." You almost laugh, but you don't. Because what would you even say? That being in charge means you now belong to the house instead of yourself. That you answer to every stain, every cracked pitcher, every late delivery of rye. That power, when given without freedom, is just another shape of servitude. You keep walking. The ring of keys clinks softly at your side like a chain. Sometimes, when no one is watching, you pause by the window and imagine what it might have felt like to simply walk away. Down the narrow road past the sheep pens, into the forest's edge where the trees whisper only to themselves. To walk without the keys, without the linen lists, without the weight of another person's schedule stitched into every hour of your day. No trays to inspect, no porridge to taste, no logs to count. Just you. But fantasies are as dangerous as droughts in this place. They dry you out slowly, because even daydreams must be efficient. There's a saying whispered among married women in hushed corners of the village. The house eats you. And now you know what they mean. It starts with the little things. You forget the feel of silence. Your hands no longer rest. Always stitching, checking, lifting, wiping. The backs of your fingers are dry from soap. Your nails are cracked. You no longer smell of rosemary or lavender. but tallow and bread flour. You're always being measured. The servants notice when your temper slips. The steward tracks your errors. Lady Alis reads your fatigue as weakness. And your husband? He expects order, peace, a warm meal and a cold drink. He doesn't want to hear about the lice in the larder or the cracked basin in the washroom. That's your domain. Invisible, necessary, silent. You begin talking to yourself, just quietly. Phrases like, 2 more sacks of barley, or don't forget to check the shutters. It helps keep the thoughts from unravelling. You notice that your back aches earlier in the day now, that your knees creak more when you kneel to sort linens. You're 20. You feel 60. Once, while refilling the oil lamp in the chapel, you find a scrap of parchment tucked behind the altar. A prayer, half faded. Deliver us from what is unseen. You wonder who wrote it. A servant, the last lady, a monk with shaking hands. You whisper it to yourself that night, because your duties are endless. You manage milk that sours too fast, fires that smoke too thick, laundry that never dries in the rain. A maid breaks a plate. She cries. You comfort, then replace it before anyone notices. Another forgets to fetch eggs. You take the blame. A goose bites your ankle. You laugh, only later realizing it left a bruise the colour of plum skin. Still, the house goes on, and so do you. You start to understand Lady Alis more, her sharpness, her constant watching, her bone-deep silence. She wasn't born cruel. She was carved into shape by the same house that is carving you now. Once, she catches you weeping in the pantry. Not loud, just quietly into a sleeve, standing beside a basket of withered onions. She says nothing, but the next morning the fire in your chamber is lit early, and there's fresh honey beside your bread. No comment, no comfort, just acknowledgement. You wonder if that's what love looks like here. Not softness, but survival. Not warmth, but endurance. You wipe your eyes, adjust your keys, and return to the storeroom, because the house is hungry, and you've learned how to feed it. Your body changes slowly, like bread rising in a quiet kitchen. Not all at once, but steadily. A tug at your waistline, a new heaviness when you stand too quickly. At first, it's a quiet secret tucked beneath your layers of wool and linen. Then, it becomes something noticed. A lowered gaze from the maid who helps you dress. A pause from Lady Alis as she glances at your untouched plate. Tasks are quietly reassigned. A chair is placed nearer the hearth. No one says the word aloud, but the air around you shifts, like everyone is waiting for your body to speak what you haven't. By the time your appetite turns sour and the scent of roasting meat makes you dizzy, it's no longer unspoken. It's assumed. You're no longer simply a wife. You are now a vessel. Your husband begins to act differently. Not kinder exactly, but attentive in a way that feels calculated. He walks beside you with visible pride, tells the cook to make meals, gentle on the stomach, orders new firewood stacked in your room, just in case. He never asks how you feel, but he smiles more often now. Lady Alis doesn't mention a child, but one morning she brings you a worn linen cloth embroidered with lilies. She says it once belonged to your husband's grandmother. It smells faintly of lavender and dust. It's the closest she's ever come to sentiment. You're glowing, someone says, but you don't feel like light. You feel watched, measured, the centre of a quiet, unending inspection. The weight isn't only in your belly, it's in every room you enter, every pair of eyes tracking whether your body will do what it's supposed to. The midwife starts visiting once a week. She touches your stomach with calm, practiced hands. She tells you what not to eat. Too much salt, no pickled fish, nothing sour after dusk. She brings you goose grease for your skin and a polished black charm carved from jet, said to ward off dark spirits. You hang it above your bed, not out of fear, but because belief in this house is its own kind of obedience, and you've learned there's no use in questioning old rituals, not when everyone else treats them as truth. By the 4th month, your days are no longer yours. No one comments when you keep the household ledgers in perfect order. When you spot a fever spreading among the servants and stop it before it reaches the kitchen, no one thanks you. But when you walk to chapel despite morning sickness, Lady Alis gives a quiet nod, as though your discomfort is the most honourable thing about you. You speak less, not from sorrow but from exhaustion, from the silence pressing inward. The first time you feel movement, you're standing in the garden. It's a soft flutter, a ripple low in your belly like wind passing through tall grass. You stop mid-step. For a second, your hand presses instinctively to your abdomen, and you smile faintly, not because you're overjoyed, but because no one else is watching. In that moment, it belongs only to you. You whisper something, soft nonsense, a sound that means nothing and everything. No one taught you this language, but it comes easily. That night, your husband places a hand on your stomach and says something about a strong boy. You don't answer. You don't correct him, because if it's a girl, you already know what girls are worth in houses like this. At supper the next day, a cousin visiting from the next estate raises a cup and jokes, "Let's hope the heir is male this time." No one laughs, but no one disagrees, and just like that, your value has a clock attached to it. You're no longer just a woman, you're an expectation in motion. You try not to think about how many women don't make it. They don't speak of it openly, of course, but the knowledge hums beneath every lullaby and every bowl of broth passed to your bedside. The gardener's wife, gone after her 3rd child. The stable master's sister, fevered and raving before the 2nd was born. Even Lady Alis. Her body bears the tale in quiet ways, the way she winces when lifting baskets, the long pauses when she speaks of her youngest, may God keep him. You begin to notice just how many graves in the chapel yard belong to women with dates barely 2 decades long. So, when the cramps come, low and slow like distant thunder, you say nothing at first. You press your lips together and finish your sewing. When the aching deepens, you excuse yourself from the supper table, saying you feel the child settling. Your husband nods, distracted. Lady Alis raises one brow but does not question. But by midnight, you can no longer stand upright. The midwife is summoned with brisk, silent urgency. You barely register her arrival, only the sharp smell of herbs and the whisper of linen being laid out. The labour is long. They bring hot cloths, boiled water, a leather strap to bite. Someone holds your hand. You think it's the maid, but her face swims in and out of focus. Pain comes in waves, so much that you forget there's a world beyond the room, beyond this bed, beyond the shattering of your own body. You hear someone say, "She's small, too small for this." Another voice, "No choice now." Then silence. And then a cry, not yours, high, thin, wet with life. The midwife lifts the child, slick and howling, and declares, "A girl." The room changes. The warmth of triumph vanishes, replaced by an almost embarrassed quiet. Someone clears their throat. The maid steps back. You don't even realize you've been holding your breath until it escapes you in a long, shaking sigh. A girl. The midwife places the baby in your arms. She is red and furious, fists clenched, eyes squeezed tight. She is perfect, and already not quite enough. Your husband enters moments later. He walks slowly to the bedside, looks down, says nothing. Then, without touching you or her, he simply nods and leaves. The door closes softly behind him. Lady Alis appears sometime before dawn. She regards the child with a tight expression, then lays a blanket across your legs. "Rest," she says. "You'll try again." And that's when you understand. This was not your victory. This was a rehearsal. You hold your daughter closer, but something has already shifted. You feel it in the way the household moves the next morning, the way the cook makes no special cake, the way the steward looks past you, the way the cradle is placed not beside your bed but in the nursery, separate. You're still praised, of course, for surviving, for strength, for getting through it well. But there's no celebration, no talk of inheritance, no trace of the joy you had dared to imagine. Your body is already being assessed for its next task. You're not done. You're never done. And as your daughter sleeps, tiny chest rising and falling like a caught sparrow, you whisper to her the only blessing you know. May you never learn the cost of being born a disappointment. They never say the word aloud, but you feel it the moment the room stills when you enter. Dowry. It lingers like smoke from the hearth, invisible, persistent, impossible to escape. A reminder that you didn't arrive alone, but carrying a calculation stitched into the hem of your wedding gown. 3 bolts of wool, 2 oxen, a strip of pasture by the river, a promise of another calf when spring returns. Your father negotiated carefully. He wanted security for you. Your husband agreed, perhaps reluctantly, but he agreed. The terms were set, the price was paid, and now every small failure feels heavier than it should. You forget to inspect the barley stores. After all that land, she still misses the grain. The household runs late to chapel. We expected more for that dowry. A stain on your sleeve, a misjudged word at supper, a moment of visible fatigue. Each slip feeds the same quiet assessment, as if the cost hasn't yet been justified, as if you were a field purchase during a lean year, and everyone is still waiting for proof that the harvest will be worth it. Once you hear a servant murmur, "They should have taken the cousin, less land, but easier temper." You don't react. You've learned not to. Even your daughter, now grown enough to be noticed, isn't spared the arithmetic. When Lady Alis orders a gown for a formal occasion, she chooses plain linen, no lace, no embroidery. "There's no need for excess," she says, eyes already elsewhere. Your daughter doesn't understand the meaning behind the choice. She smiles anyway. You do. Over time, the dowry changes shape. It becomes a blade, sometimes held by others, sometimes by yourself. You begin to count. A smooth supper service, 1 more acre earned back, a well-run household week. Perhaps the oxen were worth it after all. A mistake? The shame sinks deep, settling in your bones, because debt once internalized is far more dangerous than debt imposed. The steward starts asking questions. Why the kitchen used more salt than expected? Why the shepherd reports less milk this month? They're framed politely, reasonably, but each carries an edge, sharp beneath courtesy. You tell yourself this is normal, that every woman in your position is questioned. Until one afternoon, passing the stables, you hear someone say, "They paid well for her. You'd expect better sense." You carry those words with you for days. Even your husband begins to shift. A tightened jaw when you speak too freely. A sigh when you forget the correct order of service. These aren't accusations, they're measurements. Quiet tallies in a ledger you're not allowed to see. One evening, passing a mirror, you pause, not to study your face, but to notice what's gone. You can't remember the last time anyone used your name. Only titles now. Lady, wife, mistress. And beneath them all, unspoken but understood. Purchased. You learn to balance the invisible scales. When you forget a feast day, you make up for it by gifting candles to the chapel. When the barley fails to rise, you personally deliver baskets to the poor, so the household appears merciful. Every slip is a debt, every act of devotion an installment. Your dowry is not gold anymore, it's reputation, and it's fading fast. One morning, the steward hands you a letter from your father's house. The seal is cracked, the wax soft from handling. Inside is nothing more than polite inquiries. We hope your health is strong. We hear the river floods have not touched the southern pastures. No mention of your child, no mention of you by name. Just a ledger of concern masquerading as affection. You write back with the same detachment. You talk about weather, sheep, harvests, safe things, the kinds of things that justify a dowry. That evening you ask your husband if he'd like to visit your family's land come spring. He looks up from his cup and says, "What for? We already have what we paid for." The words are not cruel, but they land like stones. You return to your room and run your fingers along the comb your mother gave you on your wedding day. Bone, smooth, carved with birds. It once meant something. Now it feels like a receipt. You begin to watch how other women carry their worth. The merchant's wife in town, her dowry was small, but she carries herself with authority. She negotiates prices, corrects clerks, speaks over her husband in public, and no one dares scold her. But then again, her husband adores her, and adoration bends rules. Another woman, the Reeves' daughter, was married off quickly after her sister ran off with a stable hand. Her dowry was rushed, improvised, chickens mostly, and a promise to forgive a debt. She's watched like a hawk. Her husband checks her accounts. Her mother-in-law counts her bread loaves. You see it now, how dowries don't protect. They're just the opening move in a game you can't win. Even when the baby gets sick one morning, just a fever, nothing grave. You feel it in the way Lady Alis sighs before sending for the midwife. A quiet disapproval. If you'd come with better fortune, perhaps your daughter would be stronger. You tend your child all night, wiping her brow, whispering to her, singing the lullaby your own mother used to hum while carding wool. You hold her close, as if you can shield her from the calculations surrounding her tiny feverish body. By morning she's cooler, breathing more easily. You breathe too, for the first time in hours. Later that day, the cook accidentally drops a jar of preserved pears. Glass shatters. You rush to help her clean it, kneeling on the stones. The steward walks in, sees you there, and raises an eyebrow. "You're not a servant," he says. You smile softly. "No," you answer. "I'm something they bought more dearly." He chuckles, not sure if it's a joke. You don't explain. That night, as you lock away the linens and snuff the candles, you catch your reflection again. And this time, you say your own name aloud. Just once. Just to remember it still belongs to you. The law knows your name, but not as a person, only as a possession. You learn this the same way you've learned most things. Not from books or kind instruction, but from what happens when something goes wrong. It begins with the roof. A beam cracks in the south wing after a storm, and the steward insists on summoning a mason. You suggest waiting. Money is tight, winter is coming, and the servants could patch it for now. Your husband disagrees. "I'll speak with a mason," you offer, but the steward replies plainly, "He'll want to speak with the Lord. You've no say in the contract." You nod. Again. Later you discover the bill. It's larger than expected, and a number of extra charges have been slipped in. Casks of wine, hay deliveries, even 3 days' labour for a man who was never seen. You bring the parchment to your husband. He frowns, then waves his hand. The steward approved it. It's done. You ask, softly, why your name wasn't listed among those who oversee household spending. He chuckles, not unkindly. Because it's not your property. Not your property. It echoes in your head, louder than any church bell. You think of the linen you ordered last week, the one that was sent back because her ladyship cannot authorise purchase. You think of the sheep you helped tend, the ledgers you manage, the food you taste before it reaches the table, all done in his name. You're the face of the household, but never its signature. Legally your body is his, your labour is his, even your jewellery, those few trinkets brought from your mother's chest, are technically his property now. The ring on your finger, a symbol of union, yes, but also of ownership. If you were to leave, where would you go? You have no coin, no land, no written rights. Even if you had a will, you could not write it. Only widows can own. Only widows can be. You once asked the priest, carefully, what would happen if a woman left her husband and lived alone? He smiles gently and replies, well, she'd be a widow in shame, not in name. You're not sure whether he's quoting scripture or jesting. Either way, you never ask again. Your daughter, now crawling across the flagstones, giggles as she tugs at your hem. She does not know that she too will one day be counted, not for her laughter, but for her future price. A dowry to be calculated, a womb to be claimed. You pick her up and hold her close, whispering stories of wild hills and women who fly on wind instead of waiting for doors to open. At the next market day, you watch from the window as women barter for onions, for wool, for salt. Coins pass from hand to hand. One woman counts carefully, then slaps the table in triumph. You smile at her pride, and then you remember you couldn't do that. Not legally. You may not even own the comb in your pocket. Later that week, a chicken goes missing. The steward demands answers. The cook blames the maid. The maid blames the boy. In the end, the loss is attributed to the lady's carelessness. A single hen, and yet the weight of it is placed squarely on your back, because your hands are responsible, but never trusted. Your voice is heard, but never recorded. And your name, though spoken daily, leaves no mark behind. One chilly morning, you try to sign a letter. It's nothing urgent, just a note to the weaver in town about a delayed shipment of cloth. But when you reach for the quill, the steward gently intercepts it and says, best to leave that to the Lord. A woman's hand carries little weight. You freeze. It's not the first time you've been corrected. But something about his tone, that careful courtesy soaked in centuries of entitlement, settles deep into your ribs like frost. You withdraw your hand and watch as he signs in your husband's name, sealing the parchment with wax you'd warmed, using a seal you're not permitted to touch. You feel invisible in a house you run. Later you sneak back into the study, close the door and write your name on a scrap of parchment, just to see it, just to feel something of your own, even for a moment. You write it again and again, until the candle gutters low and the wax pools across the desk. You fold the parchment and tuck it into the lining of your cloak. It's your first secret in months. By law, you cannot testify in court without your husband's consent. You cannot own land. You cannot take in a servant, sign a contract, or press a complaint, not even if your husband wrongs you. In the eyes of law, you are femme covert, a woman undercover. Your identity is merged with his, your will swallowed by his name. Only widows escape this, and even they are watched. You meet a widow once, Mistress Adela, who lives alone by the chapel. She keeps bees, sells honey, and never speaks more than she must. Some call her strange, others lucky. She calls herself tired of being known only through men. You envy her a little. She can sign her name on a contract. She can light her own fire, not someone else's. She can sell her honey and use the coin. You, on the other hand, must ask before ordering new thread. Once you challenge this. You tell your husband, quietly, that you'd like to manage the accounts for the barley harvest. His brow furrows. Isn't the laundry enough? He asks. You don't answer. You know better than to plead, because even your defiance must be measured. The worst part is how normal it becomes. You stop reaching for the quill. You stop thinking of land as something you might touch. When someone says, your husband's estate, you don't correct them. When someone says, the master's ledger, you nod. Eventually you forget that there was ever a time you expected more. But some days your daughter toddles up with a stick in her fist and declares, this is mine. And you feel something twist in your chest. Not sorrow, resolve. Because she must never learn to shrink before. She's fully grown. She must never learn as you did that names can be taken and rights postponed until death. You begin to whisper lessons to her in the quiet hours about foxes and queens and ships that sail without asking permission. Stories, yes, but seeds too. One day she may ask why you never wrote your own name in the family book, and if you're still alive you will tell her the truth, that the ink wasn't allowed in your hand. But the story lived in your throat, waiting. And now it is hers. The messenger arrives just before dusk, his cloak damp with sleet, and his horse foaming at the bit. He carries only one item, a letter sealed in blue wax, stamped with your husband's family crest. You know what it means before you touch it. He's dead. Your husband, the man whose name eclipsed yours, who shared your bed and not much else, has fallen from his horse while returning from a nearby fief. They say his neck broke cleanly. They say he died quickly. They say all the things they're supposed to say. You don't speak, not right away. Lady Alis receives the news with a look that is more calculation than grief. She excuses herself from supper. The steward starts whispering about succession. The servants walk more quietly through the halls, unsure whether to offer condolences or distance. You sit alone by the hearth. Your daughter sleeps beside you, curled like a kitten, warm and unaware. And now, for the first time in years, the question hangs in the air like smoke. What happens to you? The law doesn't say you grieve. The law says you wait. For what? That depends entirely on what he left behind and how he left it. You aren't entitled to the estate, not automatically. This manor is not yours. The land, the animals, even the cradle your daughter once slept in, none of it belongs to you, unless he left you something. A will, a written word, a favour, a line that says you matter. But wills are for men who plan, men who cherish, and you're not sure he was either. The steward confirms it 2 days later. No will, just a list of debts and a ledger of holdings, and that means everything is now in flux. The heir, a cousin from the north, has been summoned, a man you've never met. He could arrive in weeks or days. He could be kind, or not. He could let you stay, or not. Lady Alis stiffens when you ask. If he chooses to honour your widow's portion, you'll have a pension. A cottage, perhaps. A cottage. Like a servant who's outlived her usefulness. You want to laugh, but your throat is too tight. You imagine leaving this place. Not the escape you once dreamed of, but something smaller. A stone cottage on the edge of the forest. Chickens. Your daughter, running wild in the weeds. You sitting by the door with a comb in your lap and your name your own again. But dreams won't feed you, and they won't protect you. The next morning, you begin sorting what little truly belongs to you. A comb, a few pins, a shawl your sister once wove, the bone spoon you used to feed your daughter when she was too small for bread. You place it all in a box, and then you wait. The mourning garments arrive in a bundle of black wool, stiff, itchy. You put them on anyway. The fabric smells of ash. People bow their heads when you pass now. Some offer kind words, some only nod. It's strange, this reverence. How quickly pity can wear the mask of respect. But pity doesn't promise security. Not here, not now. You sit by the fire and watch your daughter thread beads on a string. She hums to herself, blissfully untouched by the politics of inheritance, and all the while a question beats quietly behind your ribs. Are you finally free, or just newly vulnerable? The cousin arrives on a foggy morning, shrouded in cold and the smell of damp wool. He dismounts stiffly, speaks little, and carries himself like a man used to quiet rooms and locked chests. His name is Lord Everard, and though he greets you with civility, you recognise the calculation in his gaze. You're not kin. You're a loose end, and loose ends are either tied or trimmed. He does not ask how you are managing. He does not inquire after your daughter. He tours the estate with the steward, nods at rooms you once cleaned, appraises walls you once paced. The house bends to him quickly. Servants shift their loyalty with practised ease. That night you are not invited to dine. You are sent a plate of fish pie in your chamber, along with a folded note. You will be called upon in the morning. So you wait. Again. The next day you're summoned not to the hall, but to the study, a place you were rarely welcome in during your husband's lifetime. Lord Everard sits behind the desk, your late husband's seal ring glinting on his finger, a symbol of authority passed not by love or choice, but by law and blood. Lady, he says, the word almost too formal, I understand you serve this house diligently. Your presence is not unwelcome. That's a beginning, but then comes the wait. However, without a will, your legal claim to this estate is limited. You're not a landholder. You're not named. You are... He pauses, choosing his words carefully. Here on courtesy. Courtesy. A word that sounds like kindness but smells like warning. He offers you a cottage. Modest. Near the riverbank. Enough to raise your daughter, he says, if you remain within the bounds of decorum. You nod, because what else can you do? It is in truth more than many widows receive. Some are turned out the day after the burial, clutching only what they can carry. Others are married off again within weeks, to aging knights, to distant cousins, to anyone who will spare the new heir the burden of their upkeep. Lord Everard, for all his calculation, is not cruel, just practical. He assigns you a modest pension, enough for bread, some eggs, cloth come spring. Not enough for a servant, not enough for books, but enough. The next day, you are moved. The chest you brought on your wedding day fits easily into the cart. Your daughter claps at the sight of chickens near the cottage, unaware that everything she knew has just vanished behind her. The cottage is stone, old and a little damp, but it's quiet, and it's yours, sort of. Your name still holds no deed, but no one checks your speech here. You speak as you wish, you sing again. At night your daughter curls beside you and listens as you tell stories you were once too tired to share. Stories of bold women, clever foxes and queens who hid their power beneath plain cloaks. One evening, as you sweep the hearth, a thought enters your mind so quietly it almost slips past. He's gone, you say it aloud, and the room stays still. You are no longer married, but neither are you entirely free. You're something else, a widow. In this world, widowhood is the closest a woman comes to independence, and it comes at the highest price. You lost your title, your home, your standing. But for the first time, you feel something almost like ownership of your breath, your words, your days. You're poorer now, but also somehow more whole. The cottage is colder than you expected. Not just the air, though the wind does slip through the shutters at night and nibble at your toes like a curious animal, but in its stillness. No servants rising early, no bells tolling, no footsteps pacing the halls overhead. The silence is both gift and ghost. At first you walk softly out of habit, You still fold your daughter's blanket in the exact way the nursemaid once taught you. You still light the fire before sunrise, still store the water jug on the north wall where it won't sour, even though there's no one left to judge you, no eyes behind doors, no Lady Alice inspecting your posture or spoon count. But freedom is not peace. Not yet. You live simply. A few hens, a goat that bleats like it's always complaining, and a patch of kitchen garden you don't yet know how to coax into life. A neighbour, a woman named Maud, shows you how to test the soil, how to keep slugs off the cabbage. She has no title, no land, no husband, just her hands and her stubbornness. She laughs when you ask her if she's afraid to live alone. Alone? She says. The deer come through here every dusk, and the crows gossip more than any nobleman I've ever met. You laugh with her. It feels strange in your chest. But one night your daughter wakes sobbing, screaming really. You bolt upright, heart hammering. It takes minutes to calm her. When she finally curls against your chest, shivering, she whispers, "I dreamed we were back in the big house and I couldn't find you." You don't speak, because part of you had the same dream. You begin to realize how little stands between you and disappearance. One bad harvest, one illness, one accusation. There is no man to shield you now, and that is both freedom and danger. Some days the anxiety coils in your belly like cold water. You imagine falling while carrying a bucket. Who would find you? You imagine your daughter growing up wild, untethered, forgotten. And then you imagine the alternative, being back under a roof you could not control, beside a man who measured your worth in silence. You shake it off and rise. You do what women have always done. You keep going. But the question never fully leaves you. What if you'd run earlier? You think back to the first months of marriage, to the cracked mirror, the stained sheet, the whisper behind the pantry door. You think of the back road through the trees that no one watched closely. You could have taken a horse, or a cloak and your 2 good shoes. You could have disappeared before becoming a mother, before learning how to twist your voice into submission. But where would you have gone? There are no shelters for runaways, no laws to protect the disobedient, no kind innkeeper who hides women with trembling hands and sore ribs. You would have been returned, or worse, branded a thief, a liar, a harlot. Escape isn't just unlikely, it's illegal. A woman who runs is a woman without protection, and in this world, that's a death sentence all its own. You hear the story one afternoon at the village well. 2 women are trading gossip while hauling buckets. You're there for water too, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, blending in as best you can. And then it slips out, half whispered, half dared. "Remember Cecily, the miller's niece," one says. "Ran off with a weaver last summer. South Road, no horse, just the shoes on her feet. And her hem full of silver," the other adds with a grin. "She didn't make it 2 days." You pause. "What happened?" you ask casually. They glance at each other, not quite surprised you're listening. You're the widow in the cottage now, after all. Close enough to be pitied, distant enough to not be feared. "Caught on the road by the Reeves men," one says. "Dragged back barefoot, the silver gone," they say. And the weaver? Disappeared or hanged. Depends who tells it. "She was locked in the smokehouse for a week," the other whispers, her voice low. "Came out white as ash." You carry your water home in silence, your arms aching. That night you sit by the fire, watching the flame flicker against the stone. Your daughter sleeps soundly, clutching the little rag doll you stitched from scraps, and you think of Cecily. You never met her, but you can picture her clearly. A girl in worn boots, heart pounding, trying to make it beyond the boundary of her own name, trying to trade obedience for possibility, and paying for it. Escape, you realize, is a word sown with blood. You lie awake thinking of what happens when women flee. The church calls it abandonment. The courts call it theft of labour, of name, of expected duties. But no one ever calls it survival. You wonder how many girls have disappeared into woods or rivers or rumours, never recorded, never remembered. Some buried, some still breathing under false names, working as washerwomen or midwives in towns where no one asks. Once your husband had joked about it. Only men run, women just disappear. You'd laughed then, because it was safer than silence. But now, in this quiet room, with only the ticking of a hearth and the rise and fall of a child's breath beside you, the truth lands heavy. You didn't run, but you are gone all the same. Gone from the manor, gone from the records, gone from the prayers of those who measure women by who owns them. And yet, here you are. You grow carrots. You trade for flour. You mend your daughter's cloak and comb her hair gently each morning. You've even started writing your name again, in charcoal on scraps of linen in the margins of borrowed books. It is not escape, but it is a form of survival. One evening you find a wounded dove near the edge of the woods. Its wing is broken and it limps in circles. You bring it inside, cradle it in an apron, and feed it crumbs soaked in warm milk. Your daughter is delighted. The bird lives. She names it Cecily, and you do not stop her. On the 5th Sunday of Lent, the priest's voice thunders through the cold chapel. A woman must be ruled by her husband as the church is ruled by Christ. His breath fogs as he speaks. The villagers murmur their assent. You sit in the rear pew with your daughter beside you, her feet swinging above the floor, her fingers playing with a bit of frayed ribbon. You hear the words, and you don't flinch. Not anymore. Because you've heard them before, in sermons, in confessions, in the pages of brittle manuscripts handed down by cloistered men who never once laboured beside a hearth. But this time you also know their source. A small stained book that arrived with the midwife, a gift from her cousin, she said. Leather-bound, well-thumbed and written in French. Le Ménagier de Paris. A good husband's guide written for his 15-year-old bride. You read it by candlelight, mouth tightening with every page. It tells a wife how to behave, how to cook, how to rise early, how to be pleasing in voice and scent. It tells her to endure her husband's anger in silence, to avoid too much laughter, to use her tongue only when necessary. But the most chilling part? It praises obedience above all else, even above love. You remember how you once believed that being a good wife might earn you protection, that if you folded your hands right, kept your voice soft, learned the herbs and the ledgers, you might be safe. Now you see the truth. Obedience wasn't a path to safety. It was the price of being allowed to stay. At the well, in the fields, you hear other women echo the same rules, passed down not in books, but in gestures. A girl lowers her eyes when her betrothed passes. A wife stifles her protest when her husband strikes the table. A grandmother hushes a child for laughing too loudly in the presence of men. All of it is woven into the fabric of survival. You begin writing your own book, not with ink, but in your mind. A book that begins with, "A woman is not a beast of burden. A woman is not a vessel. A woman is not the pause between a man's sentences." You teach your daughter differently. You teach her to speak up when the water is boiling, to name the plants in the woods, to say no to the goat when it tries to nibble her apron. You know this is small, but it is something. Because the real handbook, the one you've lived through, was never about becoming a good wife. It was about learning how not to vanish. You start paying attention to the way other women bend themselves around the world. A widow who pretends she's still married to avoid questions. A mother who teaches her son to never strike a dog, but never tells him not to strike a wife. A maid who fakes a limp to be dismissed from service so she can go home before winter. None of them are disobedient, not openly, but they are rewriting the rules in quiet ways. So are you. Your daughter tugs your sleeve. She wants to know if she can run after the dove, the one still, limping through the grass. You nod, and as she runs, arms outstretched, hair flying free, you think, there is no rule book for her yet, and God willing there never will be. The handbook says a wife must submit in all things, but life teaches you differently. Submission in your world is not a singular act. It's a daily performance, a tilted head, a silence at the wrong moment, a meal placed just so to appease a man who's already eaten. It's remembering to fold the towel 3 times instead of 2, because once, long ago, your husband mentioned he preferred it. No one tells you to do these things, but everyone notices when you don't. You think of the old saying the priest once offered during a marriage blessing. A woman is the moon to her husband's sun. She shines by his light. You believed that once, until you realize the moon too pulls tides, carves cliffs, moves oceans. One morning, a girl from the village comes to your door. 15, maybe 16, wrapped in a scarf too thin for the wind. Her eyes are wide and her lip is bleeding. You recognize the signs before she speaks. He says, "I belong to him," she whispers. You let her inside. She sits near the fire, fingers shaking around a mug of broth. Your daughter watches quietly from the corner, her toy clutched to her chest. The girl's name is Edith. You remember her from the chapel, always walking behind the tanner's boy, head down. You don't ask what he did. You don't need to. Instead, you pull out old cloth to patch her skirt. You make her tea with crushed mint and a pinch of courage. You teach her how to trap a rabbit. You let her stay the night. And the next. By the 3rd day, word reaches you, whispers through the hedgerow, that you are harbouring disobedience, that a woman alone should be careful what company she keeps. You ignore it, because Edith has begun to smile again. She sweeps the hearth. She sings when she thinks you aren't listening. She picks wildflowers and tucks them behind your daughter's ear. She has stopped apologising every time she moves. You realise what you're building here isn't just a cottage, it's something more dangerous. A space where women are allowed to exist unmeasured. There's no manual for this. No rules written by monks. No page in Le Ménagier that explains how to hold a girl's hand while she relearns safety. But you do it anyway. One night, Edith tells you she wants to leave. Farther south, a village where no one knows her name. You pack her bread, a knife, a coin hidden in a button hem. You give her your comb, the bone one your mother gave you, because every girl who walks away from a life she didn't choose deserves something that belonged only to her. When she disappears into the mist the next morning, you feel something shift. Not guilt, but pride. A quiet kind. Later, your daughter asks where she went. She went where the rules are different, you say. Can I go there someday? You smile. Yes, but only if you want to. You hang the laundry that evening beneath a sky smeared pink with dusk. The handbook still sits in your cupboard, unopened, and every day you don't read it. You rewrite it in your own way. One act of kindness, one refusal to punish, one girl who got away. The first time you hear the word chastity belt, it's from the lips of a merchant's wife passing through your village. She's telling the blacksmith's daughter a joke, something crude and clever about locks and keys and the absurdity of men. You chuckle from the corner, half listening, until you realise it isn't a joke at all. She's describing a real device, iron, hinged, padlocked, meant to be worn under skirts, meant to be controlled by someone else's hands. You ask gently whether such things are common. The woman shrugs. Not here, she says, but I've heard of them in the cities. for noblemen with jealous hearts and long absences. You say nothing, but the idea clings to you like soot. The deeper cruelty isn't the device itself, it's the fact that someone invented it and others approved. That somewhere, in stone keeps and candlelit chambers, men imagined female fidelity as a mechanical problem. That trust could be replaced by keys. That desire could be locked away like grain for winter. You lie awake that night, listening to the wind. You imagine the cold bite of metal, the weight between your legs. You imagine the girls who endured it. Not just the steel, but the shame, the suspicion, the humiliation. And you know this much. It wouldn't have been made if people didn't believe women's bodies were property. Even now, long after your husband's death, you still feel ownership lingering in how the world looks at you. Your widow's garb is a flag, visible proof that you were once claimed. No man has touched you since, and because of that, people speak of you with a certain tone, respect perhaps, but laced with curiosity, as if wondering how long before you are reclaimed. You hear stories now that you're listening, of women locked away before long pilgrimages, of girls marched through towns in iron braces for suspected unchastity. One woman, they say, had a bell attached to hers, so her movement would announce temptation before she even reached it. You cannot tell which parts are truth and which are punishment told in story form. But it doesn't matter, because shame doesn't need to be real to do damage. The village has its own version of the belt, gossip. If a girl laughs too loud near the market, if she spends too much time alone in the forest, if she dares to visit the baker's son after dusk, whispers follow her like smoke. You see it happen to Marin, the new washerwoman. She's young, pretty, and quick with a smile. She brings honey to the tanner without invitation. Within a week the whispers begin. She's fast. She's loose. She'll regret that. No belt, no iron, just words. You pull Marin aside one afternoon, after seeing her eyes rimmed red with tears. You sit beside her in the sun and tell her, "They will shame you no matter what you do, so you might as well do what you choose." She stares at you. "But what if I choose wrong?" You squeeze her hand. Then you'll learn, not vanish. That night, as your daughter sleeps, you think again of the stories, not the ones in the holy books, not the fables whispered from pulpits, but the stories of real women, the ones who stitched secrets into hems, who kissed under the trees, who locked their own doors at night and refused to explain why. There's power in not explaining. The punishment isn't always iron. Sometimes it's public. You see it one market day, clear as morning. A woman from the next village over, Agnes they say, is paraded through town with her hair shaved uneven, a rope slung around her neck like a leash. Her dress is torn at the shoulder, and someone has pinned a strip of cloth across her chest that reads wanton. She's led by her husband. Behind him, two men from the parish nod solemnly, as if this spectacle is a sermon. The crowd parts as she passes. Some gasp, some sneer. No one steps in. You don't know what she did, and it doesn't matter. She's already guilty. Your daughter doesn't understand. She asks why the woman looks sad, why the people aren't helping her. You kneel beside her, tuck her hair behind her ear, and say softly, "Sometimes people forget how to be kind when they're scared." Because that's what this is. Fear, dressed up as morality. A fear so strong it demands theatre. A woman who defies the rules must be turned into a warning. You later learn that Agnes was caught meeting a man in the orchard, not in bed, not in sin, just meeting. That was enough. And still, no one punished the man. This is how control works, not just through law, but through shame. Through humiliation so severe that others fall back into silence, afraid of becoming the next parade. You begin to recognize the tools, the verbal chastity belts, the invisible cages, words like loose, harlot, filthy, brazen. You hear them whispered and flung and carved into the backs of young women who dare to own their desire. You remember how even in marriage, love was not yours. You were told when to give yourself, how, why. You were expected to be both vessel and gatekeeper, never once asked what you wanted. You never had the language to say it then, but you do now. You write letters you don't send, pages where you describe how it felt to lie beneath someone whose touch held no tenderness, how it felt to smile at supper while bleeding inside, how it felt to be watched, counted, weighed like livestock. You burn the pages in the hearth, one by one, not out of shame, but because they are no longer secrets. They are yours, and you don't owe anyone the pieces of your healing. One morning your daughter asks you if girls are ever allowed to choose who they kiss. The question freezes you in place. You place the bread dough down, wipe your hands, and crouch to meet her eyes. Yes, you say, but only if the choice is truly yours, not made out of fear, not forced, not traded. She nods solemnly, then returns to her drawings. You sit there, watching her, wondering if the world she grows into will be gentler, if the stories she inherits will be ones where women are not defined by who they resist or submit to, but by what they build, protect, and love, and maybe, just maybe, what they desire. That night you step outside and look at the moon. You remember the priest's words, "The woman reflects the man like the moon reflects the sun." But the moon has its own gravity, and tonight it is full. It happens on a Tuesday in broad daylight. You hear the shouting first, then the hollow thump of something wooden, maybe a stool, followed by the sharp crack of pottery. A crowd gathers outside the weaver's cottage, eyes wide, mouths tight. You know that sound. You've heard it before. It lives in the bones of women. A moment later she stumbles out. Her name is Alice, barely 20, hair tangled, lips split, one side of her face already blooming purple. Her husband stands in the doorway behind her, arms crossed, unbothered. No one moves, not the men, not the priest walking by, not even the steward's son who watches with something like idle curiosity. You reach her first, you take her arm, gently, not like he did, and guide her toward the well. She's trembling, not crying, just stunned. "He said I burned the bread," she mutters. "He said I laughed at him." You know this script. You've lived parts of it. While you dab her lip with a wet cloth, someone nearby mutters, "She should have stayed silent." Someone else probably gave him reason. The old excuses rise like mist. She disrespected him. She embarrassed him. She provoked him. Words that rearrange the blame like furniture, always placing the burden neatly on her shoulders. Alice doesn't look up. "He said if I tell anyone, he'll throw me in the river." And he could. That's the cruel part. There are no laws to protect her. Not really. A husband is allowed to correct his wife. So long as the beating doesn't kill her or make her useless to the household, he faces no consequence. After all, a man must rule his house. And sometimes, they say, discipline is necessary. You walk her back to your cottage. Your daughter helps wash Alice's hands. You brew broth, soft bread, a poultice for the bruises. Alice sleeps in your bed that night, curled like a wounded animal. In the morning she tries to leave. You block the door. "You don't have to go back," you say. Her eyes fill, not with tears but with disbelief. "Where else can I go?" You don't have an answer, not a good one. There are no safe houses, no sisters' halls, no convents that take in battered women without coin or connections. Her family won't intervene. She's married now, property exchanged, vows made. Her bruises are now private matters. So you do the only thing you can. You tell the village she's helping you with your child, that she's needed here, that she's too ill to return. It's a fragile fiction, but no one challenges it. Not yet. Later, someone slips a note beneath your door. Careful where you place your pity. She's not your burden. But you already know that. She's not your burden. She's you. She's all the women who couldn't run, who whispered help into the wind and hoped someone heard. The next day, Alice joins you in the garden. Her hands are swollen, but she digs carefully, pulling weeds, planting onions. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. Because in this house, silence is no longer submission. It's recovery. By the end of the week, the rumours start to crawl in. They say Elise is hiding in the widow's cottage. She's bewitched her. Must be something unnatural, the way she stares at the ground. A woman who takes another man's wife into her house invites God's wrath. It doesn't matter that she's bruised. It doesn't matter that she nearly collapsed in your arms. All that matters is that she left. And in leaving, she broke the unspoken rule. No matter how badly you're treated, you stay. Because staying means order. Staying means obedience. Staying means the world doesn't have to shift. You receive a visit from the priest that Sunday. He brings a loaf of bread and a scripture in his hand. His face is soft. He asks if he might speak with Alice. Just a word, he says, to encourage forgiveness, to help her find her way back. You do not open the door. You thank him for the bread and send him away with a blessing and a firm, silent smile. That night you tell Alice a story, one you've never said aloud, about the night your husband shoved you hard enough that you stumbled into the hearth, how the iron poker burned your arm, how you covered the wound with your sleeve for weeks and told the midwife it was an accident with a kettle. Alice listens, doesn't speak, then says, "That's why you don't flinch." You nod, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering and choosing not to repeat. You've learned how to measure people by what they tolerate in others, who jokes when women are shamed, who turns away when they're struck, who laughs when they cry, and who quietly reaches out a hand. In the days that follow, Alice stays close. She doesn't ask for much. She helps with the garden, mends what she can, and begins to hum while she works. Not songs from church, little tunes from somewhere older, field songs maybe, or lullabies passed from one woman to another across centuries of rough hands and hopeful hearts. Your daughter clings to her like a sister. She asks if Alice will stay forever. You say, she can stay as long as she wants. But you both know it can't last forever. One morning, a man arrives at the edge of the trees. He doesn't come up to the cottage, just watches from a distance, arms crossed, a dog at his side. Alice sees him first. Her face goes still. You do not panic. You stand with her. And after a long moment, the man turns and walks away. He will be back, maybe with others, maybe not. You begin preparing anyway. You speak with the women at the market, the ones who've also flinched. You speak in code. You exchange bread for candles, cloth for quiet promises. One woman offers her brother's cart. Another, a place to sleep in her attic if needed. A map begins to form, not of roads, but of hands, of voices, of safe corners. And just like that, something changes. The village, long ruled by silence, begins to ripple with the sound of women speaking just a little louder, standing just a little closer, watching the bruises that once passed unnoticed. It's not a revolution. It's not defiance. Not yet. But it is the first crack in a wall built from centuries of whispered obedience. And in that crack, something warm begins to grow. She arrives just before the first frost, Lady Alice. You recognize the silhouette before you see her face, tall, straight-backed, wrapped in thick wool dyed the colour of ash. Her hair is mostly grey now, but her eyes haven't changed. Sharp, cold, measuring. You didn't expect to ever see her again. She steps into your cottage without asking permission. Doesn't sit, doesn't remove her gloves, just stands in the centre of the room, scanning everything. The dried herbs, the patched chair, the blanket your daughter left draped over the stool. "I heard you've taken in strays," she says. You don't answer. She turns slowly toward you. The air is displeased. Lord Everard doesn't care for disorder, or charity that smells too much like disobedience. So there it is, not just a social call, a warning. You offer her tea anyway, because that's what civility demands. She declines, of course. She circles the room once, pausing by the window. Your daughter is outside, picking up acorns. Alice is with her, arms folded, watching the road. Lady Alis doesn't look at them. "You're not a noblewoman anymore," she says. "Your duties are gone. You could have disappeared quietly. But instead you choose this." You meet her eyes. "I choose survival." "No," she says. "You choose spectacle." There it is again. That word they all fear. Not sin, not scandal. Spectacle. Because women must endure quietly. They can weep, bleed, wither, but they must not draw attention. Helping another woman isn't rebellion, you say. Her lip tightens, and for a moment you see something flicker behind her expression. Something you've only seen once before, the night she caught you crying in the pantry. Pity, maybe. Recognition. "Do you think I had a choice?" she says. You don't answer, because you know what she means. She married young, bore sons, buried one, watched her husband ride off to war and return with less kindness than he left with. She upheld every rule, kept every ledger, never let the fire go out or the salt run low. And what did it buy her? A manor that isn't hers, a name that will die with her, and a legacy of obedience worn like a chain around her neck. "Do you think I was never struck?" she whispers. The words hang in the room like smoke. You set down your tea. She turns to leave, but pauses at the door. "You have a daughter," she says. "She'll pay the price for your defiance." Then she's gone. You don't watch her ride away. Instead, you kneel by the hearth and stoke the fire. You add another log. You sweep the ash. You set the bread to rise. Because that's what women have always done. They carry the weight of warnings, and still they build. That night, you lie awake wondering if she was right, if you've invited danger, if you've given your daughter a harder road by daring to live outside the lines. But then you remember how she laughs now, freely, loudly, without glancing over her shoulder, and you know, with quiet certainty, you would choose it all again. Winter bites early that year. The frost creeps over your shutters before the leaves finish falling. The goat's breath comes out in little puffs of steam, and your daughter insists on sleeping wrapped in 2 blankets, even though she kicks them off in her sleep. You spend most of your days preparing, storing potatoes in the floor pit, drying herbs above the hearth, mending the same mittens 3 times over. Alice stays. She doesn't speak much about her husband anymore, but you see the marks he left, less on her skin now, more in the way she flinches at sudden laughter, or folds herself smaller in crowds. She's learning to take up space again, slowly, carefully. You teach her the rhythms of the cottage, where the roof leaks, which logs burn hotter, how to sweeten turnips so a child will eat them. In return, she teaches your daughter how to plait her hair like the women in the Highlands. She sings songs in a dialect you don't recognise. You've made a kind of household here, strange and soft around the edges. No man at the head of the table, no lord of the ledger, just shared work, shared warmth, and shared silence when it's needed. And that's when you notice something you hadn't dared hope for. You're no longer afraid of being watched. The first time you realise it, you're at the well again. The butcher's wife makes a sly comment, something about houses with no fathers, the sort of remark that used to make your stomach tighten. But this time, you look her straight in the eye and say, "Better none than a cruel one." And the silence that follows? It belongs to you. It spreads. Another woman coughs into her hand to hide a laugh. One more offers you a nod, subtle but sure. Even the miller's daughter, who married at 14 and hasn't smiled since, meets your gaze for a heartbeat longer than usual. The spell of silence is breaking. Not loudly, not yet. But with quiet cracks, like thawing ice, Alice begins helping other women, not just with laundry and chores, but with bruises and fears. She listens. She tells them what to pack if they need to leave, who to speak to, where to knock after dark. It's risky. You should be scared, but instead, you feel something warm begin to settle in your chest. One night she asks if you regret it, taking her in, standing against Lady Alis, turning your cottage into a question people are still trying to answer. You stir the stew, then answer without looking up. "No, I regret all the years I kept quiet." She nods. You don't need to say more. Later you sit by the fire and stitch a new hem on your daughter's tunic. She plays by the hearth, building tiny villages out of kindling and stones. She gives each figure a name, she assigns them homes, and when one of the pretend women gets angry, she doesn't silence her. She lets her shout, and then builds her a new house. You watch her and realise she's never seen you afraid of a man's voice. She's never heard you apologise for having your own. She's never watched you disappear into a title, and because of that, she may never have to claw her way back to herself the way you did. You taught her that women don't have to shrink. Even if the world tries to crush them like frostbitten leaves. It begins with a whisper in the bakery. "Did you hear? The widow let her daughter walk to the market alone." You don't hear it firsthand. You hear it the way all things come to women in small towns. Second-hand, softened at the edges, delivered like a warning disguised as news. It arrives in the mouth of the butcher's niece, who smiles sweetly as she says it, like she's complimenting your apples. "She's what? 8, she adds. "You're brave." But it's not bravery she means. It's recklessness. Improper. Careless. Unmotherly. You thank her politely, of course, you always do. But something inside you hardens. Because you had watched your daughter walk that road. Her boots laced tight. Her basket clutched proudly to her chest. You'd watched the way she greeted old Maud at the turn, stepped carefully around the muddy patch by the smithy, and returned with a bundle of dried peas and a story about the ducks that chased her. She had glowed. Not because she was unattended, but because she was trusted. And trust, as you well know, is the rarest gift a girl can receive. Still, the whispers spread, not just about your daughter's walk, but about everything. They say your cottage is strange now, that women come and go, that there's too much laughter, that the roof smells of rosemary and firewood and something dangerous, as if peace must be earned and you haven't paid enough. You find yourself watching the corners of rooms again, listening to conversations behind closed doors. It's a habit you thought you'd broken. You learn of a new name whispered at the alehouse. Witch. Not shouted, not carved into doors, just breathed between sips. She brews, she teaches, she shelters. You shouldn't be surprised. In this world, witch is just another word for woman who won't disappear. Still, it chills you, not because it's true, but because truth doesn't matter. You've seen how rumours bloom into torches. One evening, your daughter brings home a drawing she made at the baker's table. 3 women standing under a moon. One is you, one is Alice. The third is a figure she calls the Bird Lady. a travelling herbalist who once gave her a feather. They're sisters, she says, but not by blood. You press the picture to your chest, trying not to weep. The next day, a man from the manor comes riding down the path. Not Lord Everard, one of his men. He doesn't dismount, doesn't smile. Too many visitors, he says. Questions about what you teach, about what you allow. You fold your arms. I allow survival, you say. He doesn't reply, just turns his horse and disappears into the woods. That night Alice sharpens the knife by the hearth without needing to be asked. Neither of you speak about it, because you know what's coming. Not fire, not fury, but scrutiny. The kind that peels back curtains and asks why your daughter speaks so freely, why your garden grows so well, why bruised women leave, your house with straighter backs and unbowed heads. You stay awake long after the others sleep, listening to owls, to wind, to the stillness before a storm. Because now the village isn't just watching you, it's waiting for a reason. The inspection arrives quietly, not with torches or shouting, but with polite questions asked at the edge of the well, with priests lingering too long near your garden wall, with women who once smiled now crossing the lane a step too quickly. Suspicion wears no uniform, it only wears familiar faces made unfamiliar. At first it's the small things they come after. A villager tells you your goat has wandered too far. Another says your rosemary hedge grows too wide, crowding the road. A boy is sent to ask if you charge coin for poultices. He says it like a child asking about sweets, but you see the worry in his mother's eyes standing behind him. You answer them all gently, but you understand what's really being asked. They want to know if you've forgotten your place, because in their minds, kindness that isn't sanctioned becomes power, and power, when held by a woman without a husband, becomes dangerous. Even your daughter begins to notice. Why doesn't the baker smile at me anymore? You say she's probably tired, but your daughter watches people more carefully after that. She walks with her shoulders straighter. She stops offering to help strangers carry their baskets. It's not the lesson you wanted to teach her. It's just the one the world insists on teaching first. One afternoon, a woman you once helped arrives at your door. Her cheek is bruised again, her voice lower than you remember. I can't stay, she whispers, but I had to say thank you. You invite her in anyway, she refuses. They'll say I've been here. You press bread into her hands, wrap it in linen. Your fingers brush and she flinches, not from pain, but from shame. As she turns to go, she hesitates at the threshold. I wish I'd stayed, she says, but he said if I came back again. Her voice fades. You watch her walk down the road, half shadowed by the hedgerow, as if trying to vanish from her own story. Later that night, your daughter asks what it means to be called a witch. You hold her close and tell her, it means a woman people fear because they don't understand her. She frowns. But why would they fear someone who helps? You don't answer, because the truth is too heavy for a child's arms. But in your own mind, you know the reason. They fear because you do what they won't, because you listen when others turn away, because you mend things they would rather leave broken. You fear the next knock on the door, the accusation wrapped in politeness, the summons delivered in the name of order or purity or some holy pretense. But you don't stop. You dry the herbs, you tend the sick, you teach your daughter the names of roots and stars, and when Elise braids your hair at dusk, fingers steady, quiet, you realize you've built something no accusation can fully burn down. Not a rebellion, not a convent, but a refuge. And in this world, that alone is an act of defiance. The bells ring louder these days, not in celebration, not in mourning, but in warning. Each Sunday the priest's sermons grow longer, heavier, knotted with words like virtue and submission and obedience. He no longer greets you by name, no longer asks after your daughter. When his eyes meet yours, it's like he's reading a list of sins only he can see. This is what it means when the church begins to watch you, not with kindness, but with doctrine. They cannot prove anything, because there is nothing to prove. You haven't summoned spirits, you haven't hexed cattle, you haven't danced under moonlight unless weeding onions by candle counts. But it doesn't matter. You're a woman who acts without permission, and that is enough. You begin to notice the way scripture is used like a leash, from pulpits and confessionals, from men with soft voices and sharper intentions. You hear it in the lessons whispered to girls. A quiet woman is a blessed woman. A wife who obeys brings glory to her house. A mother must be watchful of the soul, not the flesh. At the market, an older woman glances at your daughter and says, "Best to start training her tongue now, before it grows too clever." You smile, but your fingers curl around the bread basket. You teach your daughter anyway, not rebellion, just knowledge. Names of plants, phases of the moon, which river stones stay warm longest by the fire. You show her how to barter without apology, how to sit tall even when every eye is on her, because you know what's coming, and it starts, as it always does, with concern. One morning, the steward from the manor appears at your door with two men you don't know. They wear plain clothes, but they don't smell of soil. Their boots are too clean. He clears his throat. "There are questions." You say nothing. The men ask how many women have stayed with you, whether you've offered remedies, whether you've spoken against a husband, whether you've used charms, whether you've had dreams, as if rest in this life is suspicious. You answer plainly. No, you do not cast spells. Yes, women stay with you when they have nowhere else. Yes, you've used herbs just like the midwives and grandmothers before you. No, you haven't dreamed anything worth recording. They nod. Write something down. Before they leave, one of them glances at your daughter. "Is she yours?" You place a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," you say. "All mine." That evening, Alice boards up the loose shutter in the back room. You boil water without knowing what for. Your daughter draws circles in the ashes on the hearth. You whisper to her, "Do you know what obedience means?" She nods. "It's when you do what someone says." Even if it's wrong, she hesitates. Sometimes you shake your head. "No," you tell her, "that's submission." "Then what's obedience?" You pause. "Obedience," you say, slowly, "is what they call it when they want you to be quiet while they decide who you are." She frowns, then wipes away the circles in the ash. The wind howls outside. You light the candles anyway. It begins, not with fire, but with silence. The silence of friends who no longer call. The silence of doors that don't open when you knock. The silence of the priest as he skips the usual blessing and moves straight into his homily about Eve and her curiosity. About how women bring ruin when they forget their place. You sit in the back row with your daughter. She leans into you, puzzled. But you understand every word behind his words. You've heard this liturgy before, just in other forms. Once it was a husband saying, "You make me look weak." Once it was a neighbour asking, "Why aren't you remarried yet?" Now it's a sermon warning. She who speaks too freely tempts the devil's hand. By week's end, your garden has been trampled, the rosemary hedge pulled up. You find footprints leading to the coop. One hen gone, another dead, throat sliced. No note, just the stench of message. When you show Alice, she doesn't weep. She sets a trap that very night. You don't stop her, because kindness without defence isn't virtue, it's surrender. You remember a story your grandmother told, of a woman in her village who knew how to read the stars. She helped a farmer avoid a flood, and he praised her as blessed, until the season turned and his next crop failed. Then she was cursed. She was dragged from her hut, tied to a post and tested with water. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent. She sank, and they called it justice. You'd been a child when you heard that story. Now, watching your own daughter crouch by the threshold, eyes alert, you understand something else. They don't fear witches. They fear women who survive without them. Later, Alice hands you a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Hide it under your floorboards, she says. You open it, a pouch of dried herbs, 3 coins and a shard of obsidian. Just in case. You try to thank her. She stops you. This is your house, but we built it together. The line between friend and sister has long since vanished. That night you whisper to your daughter stories of the women who came before, the ones who knew when to stay and when to run, the ones who kept secrets in their hems and prayers in their teeth, the ones who never had names written in books, but who shaped the world anyway. You tell her they will try to rewrite you, to erase you, but you're not ink, you are flame. She doesn't fully understand, but she listens, and that is enough. Because when the time comes, when the next knock lands harder, when the whispers turn to commands, when even mercy feels like a knife, you'll need each other more than ever. For now, you close the shutters, you check the traps, you tuck your daughter into bed, brushing her hair behind her ear, and tell her one last truth. You are not dangerous because you're different. You're dangerous because you remind them that they were once free too. The summons arrives on a market day, a folded scrap of parchment pressed into your hand by a boy too nervous to look you in the eye. No seal, no signature, just a line written in ink so faint it looks like it's trying to vanish. You are to appear before the manor steward, before sundown. That's it. No charge, no explanation. But the message couldn't be clearer. You tuck the note into your apron and finish your errands in silence. But everyone can see it in your posture. They know. They saw the boy. They saw your face. And suddenly the crowd shifts around you like a river cutting a new path, one that no longer includes you. Even the butcher, who once offered you marrow bones for free, simply shrugs when you ask for neck meat. You should get home, he says, before dark. On the walk back, Alice joins you without a word. She must have heard. Word travels fast when fear is involved. What do they want? She asks. You laugh softly. I imagine they want me to say sorry. For what? For surviving. She offers you her arm. You take it. The steward's hall is cold when you arrive. No fire in the grate, no bread on the table. Just a chair, placed precisely in the centre of the floor, facing nothing. And behind it, standing in a half circle like judges in a play, the steward and 3 men you don't know. One wears a wooden cross. Another wears a black cap pulled low. The third carries a ledger. You sit slowly. The steward clears his throat. We've had concerns. Of course they have. He continues. It's said that women in this village trust you more than they trust their own husbands, that some seek your counsel in private, that you've encouraged certain disobediences. You raise your eyebrows. Like teaching them not to flinch? One of the men snorts. The one with the ledger does not look up. The steward continues. You've never remarried. I haven't. You permit unmarried women to sleep in your home. I do. You dispense herbal remedies without license. There is no license for herbs. And your daughter, she speaks boldly, without shame. Your hands curl in your lap. Because she has nothing to be ashamed of. They exchange glances. The man with the cross steps forward. Do you believe in submission to your betters? I believe in truth. He smiles tightly. That's not what I asked. You inhale, slow, controlled. I don't believe anyone becomes better simply by standing higher. There it is. the moment you see it shift. This was never a hearing. It was a performance, and your part was written before you even arrived. But still, you perform it your way. Because even when you're surrounded, even when the trap has closed, even when the fire is being stacked just beyond the door, you can still choose how to walk through it. You stand. I've raised a daughter in a world that tried to keep her silent. If that's a crime, then write it down properly. The man with the ledger looks up at last and begins to write. They don't jail you. They don't brand you. They do something worse. They watch you. Every day after the hearing you feel it, a slow tightening, like someone is stitching your shadow to the ground one thread at a time. The woman who used to share her eggs with you now passes your gate with her basket tucked close. The children who once played in your yard are suddenly called home. Even Alice begins walking the long way around the square to avoid stares. The steward never sends another message, but he doesn't need to. Because now the whole village carries his message for him. It's in the way they stop asking you for advice. Stop mentioning your name. Stop acknowledging your daughter in the lanes. You've become a gap in the road, an absence pretending not to exist. This, you realize, is how power punishes those it cannot openly destroy. They call it social correction. You call it rot beneath painted walls. At home, things change too, quietly. Your daughter starts whispering. She moves more carefully, checks the windows more often. She asks if she should wear her shawl tighter, speak less boldly, stay home from the market. You watch her shrink, not because she's afraid of being wrong, but because she's afraid of being seen. One evening she asks, "Mama, if people hate you for being strong, is it safer to be weak?" You look at her for a long time. "No," you say softly, "it's just lonelier." But you don't lie. You don't say it gets better. You don't say justice always wins. You don't say the truth protects you, because the truth is what put you here. Instead, you build small defences, a second door bolt, a coded knock, a signal candle in the window. You teach your daughter to write with both hands, left in public, right in private. You show her how to grind herbs fine enough to pass for flour. You teach her how to braid secrets into her hair. You show her what strength looks like when it's buried for safety. Because you know this isn't over. They haven't accused you of witchcraft. Not yet. But the word hangs in the air now like smoke in thatched straw. It needs only a spark, a fever, a stillborn lamb, a man's misfortune and a woman to blame, and you're already marked. One night someone leaves a pile of ash at your doorstep, shaped crudely into a woman's figure. The legs are broken off. Your daughter finds it before you do. She says nothing, just stands there, looking down. You crouch beside her, brush the figure away with your apron. Then you look at her and say, "It doesn't matter what they call us." She looks up. "What do we call ourselves?" You think for a moment. "Alive," you whisper. That night, you sleep with a knife under your pillow again. Not because you expect to use it, but because there are battles even silence can't win, and you're not ready to leave the stage just yet. You can smell the fire before you see it. Someone's chimney, you think at first, but the scent is wrong. Not the thick comfort of hearth smoke or baking bread. It's sharper, greener, like wet wood and fear. You step outside and see the glow. Not a cottage, not a hearth. A pile, lit in the clearing just past the village edge, where old lumber was once stored. And above it, nailed to a post, a crude sign made of pine board. One word charred into the grain with a hot iron. Witches. Your heart doesn't race. It slows. Because this is no longer whisper, no longer warning. It's declaration. They've built the stage. Now they're just waiting for the actor. Alice arrives an hour later, breathless, a streak of soot across her cheek. "They tried to burn the old widow's hut," she says. "She was out gathering reeds. They left the door open, let the fire burn low. It's a show. You nod. They want you to see it, she adds. You already have. And now the village waits, quietly, but not idly. Watching your house, watching your daughter, watching each interaction, every greeting, every pause, every glance at the sky before you speak. It's not just men with torches who build the gallows. Sometimes it's women with silence, children with eyes too wide, neighbours who forget your name. You gather what you can't leave behind. You start small, a carved comb, the black thread from your mother's hem, the scrap of paper with your daughter's first clumsy letters, each tucked into the folds of a coat already too thin for what's coming. You think of your late husband. His name hasn't passed your lips in months. Would he have stood by you now? Would he have protected you, or vanished into the crowd? The question haunts you, and that's the cruelest part. Not knowing if your pain began with betrayal, or with love that was never quite strong enough to endure what the world demands of women who won't kneel. That night, Alice returns with news. There's a cart. It leaves for the Northern Market Road just before dawn. Grain delivery. The driver owes me a favour. You understand immediately, but your daughter does not. We're leaving, she whispers. You crouch beside her, press her hand to your chest. No, you say gently. We're surviving. She doesn't cry. Instead, she begins folding her shawl. Clumsy, precise, like she's learning a ritual older than fire. The next hours blur. You pack nothing heavy, only what matters. Stories, skills, secrets. You leave behind your name, your garden, the woven stool you made the winter your husband died, all the things you thought made a home, and just before the first rooster crows you blow out the candle and walk out the back door without looking back. The cart waits in the trees. The driver says nothing, just helps you climb in, tips his hat at your daughter and flicks the reins. You tuck her close, wrap your shawl tighter. You don't know where you're going, only that you will arrive, because you must. The road north is cruel in its own way. No flames here, no judgmental eyes, just mud, frost, and the endless sound of wooden wheels grumbling over stone. Your daughter sleeps fitfully at your side, head nestled in your lap, her hands still clutched around that little bundle of thread and parchment you let her keep. You whisper stories into her ear, not of saints or queens, but of women who vanished and lived, women who sewed their names into seams, who brewed medicine from weeds, who stitched silence into power. It steadies you, a lullaby of defiance. 3 days pass before you reach the town. It's larger than yours, louder, hungrier. People don't recognize your face here. They don't lower their voices when you pass. But anonymity is not safety. It's just a thinner veil over danger. You barter your way into a cellar room behind the cooper's shop. One shared bed, a draughty wall. But it's yours, and for now, that's enough. You work quickly. Mornings at the dye vats, stirring wet cloth until your fingers prune. Afternoons mending seams for strangers who don't ask questions. Evenings selling balm and salt packets in the market square, your old knowledge dressed in new language. You do not mention witchcraft. You do not offer counsel. You do not look anyone too long in the eye. But your daughter, she glows. She makes friends, learns to bargain, speaks with a rhythm that's bold and strange and wonderfully hers. She carves charms out of walnut shells and trades them for bread. Sometimes you find her humming at the window, sketching patterns into the condensation with her fingertip. Spirals, stars, circles inside circles. Protection, she says when you ask, just in case. You smile, but inside a knot tightens. 'Cause you know how this goes, how girls like her, clever, loud, unafraid, are watched more closely the older they get. You've seen how the world greets bold women. With suspicion, with fire. You begin preparing again, quietly, carefully. You teach her how to write her name backward, in case she needs to hide it. You teach her to recognize dried herbs by smell in the dark. You show her the map you've drawn, smuggled from old cloth wrappings, of the mountain paths to the sea. One night she asks, "Do we always have to be ready to run?" You pause. Then, "No, only until they forget we're dangerous." She doesn't ask what happens after that. But you know, because in the flicker of a tavern lamp, you once saw a woman with a limp and a scar across her brow pass a coded glance to a fishmonger who didn't speak. Because you once bought honey from a beekeeper whose jars were etched with the same spiral your daughter draws. Because under the ash and fear, there has always been something else moving, quietly, a network, a sisterhood, not witches, not exactly, just women who remember. And if you live long enough, blend well enough, teach carefully enough, perhaps one day your daughter will meet them too. Perhaps she already has. You tuck her in. Then you sit by the window, sewing, not to sell, but to stitch a name into fabric that no fire will ever burn. Spring arrives without asking your permission. It creeps in shyly, first through thawed earth beneath the town square, then in the shy bloom of clover near the bakery, and finally in your daughter's hair, where yellow petals stick like they've found a home. You breathe again. Not because danger has passed. It hasn't. You still check the door twice. You still avoid the guards in the square. You still keep the coded map folded beneath your bedpost. But there's more room to breathe now. Your daughter begins teaching the neighbour's child to read. A little boy with wide eyes and bruised knuckles. You watch her trace letters on flour sacks, hear her gentle corrections, and something tight in your chest unwinds. You've not only survived, you've passed something forward. One afternoon, while collecting kindling behind the tannery, you find a symbol etched into the stone wall. 2 crossed lines with a curl at the base. You stop, touch it. Familiar. Not yours, but known. A signal. They're here. You wait. Not a day, not a week. But on the 3rd Sunday of the month, a woman approaches your stall at the market. Mid-40s, wears her hair plaited low and speaks with a lilt not native to this town. She doesn't ask your name, she doesn't give hers. She simply places a bundle of dried rosemary on your table and says, "This smells like your garden, doesn't it?" And just like that, you know. A door opens. A new one. You meet them one by one. At the apothecary, in the church's back pew, at the well before dawn. Some are midwives, others healers. One works in the mayor's kitchen. None call themselves witches. All carry stories like yours, burned gardens, lost homes, escaped verdicts. You realise something you hadn't before. Silence may keep you alive, but connection is what makes living worth it. You join, not in name. There's no oath, no ceremony, just passing small things forward. A safe house location scrawled in vinegar on parchment. A birthing herb blend wrapped in salt. A charm of wax pressed with a symbol only you understand. You remember what it felt like when no one looked you in the eye. So now you see people. A girl with quick fingers and sad shoulders. A woman at the dye vats who works too fast for someone just learning. A boy who sells nettle tea and never blinks when women speak boldly. You begin watching, gently, and where you can, you nudge them. Because survival isn't just fleeing, it's finding others. One day, your daughter walks home with a friend, a bright-eyed girl with ash-stained sleeves and a laugh like cracked bells. You raise an eyebrow, your daughter just smirks. She's not from here either. You smile. You don't need to ask. Later that week, you catch them giggling over something hidden in a pastry tin. Inside, a hand-drawn symbol on scrap linen, clumsy and hopeful. A spiral circled thrice. protection, legacy, a future that dares to remember. You don't speak. You just hug her a little, tighter that night, careful not to wake her. And for the first time in years, you sleep deeply. You dream of water, still and dark at first, then rippling, warming, curling like breath over skin. In the distance, laughter, soft and safe. You stir, not to wake, but to sink deeper, into peace, into memory, into the shape of a life not dictated by fear. When morning comes, it's quieter than usual. Your daughter is already awake, outside with her new friend, chalking patterns on the worn stone near the bakery steps. Spirals again, triangles, suns with tiny hearts in their centres, old symbols, new meanings. You step outside with tea, let the warmth of the cup settle into your hands, and you watch. The villagers pass them, some glancing, some smiling. No one stops them, no one scolds. Perhaps no one sees, or perhaps they do, but choose, at last, not to strike. It's not a perfect world. You still hear stories. A woman arrested in the south for moon brewing. A girl beaten in a village not far from yours for keeping pet frogs and whispering to them like kin. One woman disappeared entirely after tending to a lord's sick child, with nothing but herbs and clean hands. But your daughter is still here. So are you. One night, the woman with the plaited hair returns. This time she brings parchment, a list, names, a route, places where healers are needed, places where laws have grown looser or blind. They want someone to help teach, she says, the safe kind, quiet power. You're older now, bones ache faster, but your mind is sharp, and your hands still remember the blend for fever root and the tea for birth pains. You agree, not to flee this time, but to carry knowledge forward. You leave your daughter with Alice, who's joined you at last, moving with a limp and a sharpness to her tongue that age has not softened. She watches the girls like a hawk, because love sometimes looks like vigilance. You take the road again, this time not in a cart, head down in fear, but walking head high, with a pouch of herbs, a satchel of notes, and a name you no longer hide. And when people ask why you travel, you simply smile and say, I'm looking for women who remember. Sometimes they nod, sometimes they look away, but sometimes they lean in and whisper their own memories back. The fire's burning low now. You're tucked beneath the covers, eyes heavy, heart softer than when we began. The weight of centuries has settled across your chest, not to press you down, but to remind you that you are part of something older, wiser, quieter than books and louder than flames. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't the romance of ballads or embroidered tapestries. It was duty, it was law, it was survival, stitched together by women who learned to live in silence, or in secret, or in slow rebellion. And yet they endured. In the needle's eye, in the bitter tea, in the chalk spirals scratched into doorways by girls who hadn't learned to be afraid yet. Tonight, you've walked alongside them, not as a ghost, but as a witness. You've heard their bargains whispered between church bells. You've felt their defiance folded in bread dough and bundled in herbs. You've seen how love, true, defiant, unshakable love, survived where law and fire tried to erase it. So let yourself drift now. Let the world fall away until all that's left is the soft hush of wind through barley fields, the creak of a wooden gate at dusk, the sound of distant laughter that might just be your own. You're safe, you're warm, and somewhere in the dark a woman is sewing your name into a seam, just in case the world forgets you were ever here.